Welcome to the next section from chapter 40 to 55. This is where it shifts dramatically, both in theology and even the way that it doesn't again mention Isaiah's name. It's no longer Isaiah giving the king advice. It's something completely different. This is really incredible. It's after Hezekiah now. We're 100 odd years into the future and to 539 BC. We'll have a look at it on the timeline now. Where you can see this. As we can see on this timeline, we've had Jehoshaphat. We didn't have Jehoshaphat, but I just like saying, great jumping Jehoshaphat. We've had Isaiah and Azariah, or same name for different names for the same person. His co-regent Jotham, which then he died and Jotham became the king. And then, as we can see, Isaiah starts prophesying there to the southern kingdom. We had Ahaz, we had Hezekiah, but then Hezekiah's son Manasseh is the worst. And so let's have a little bit of a look at the context here of Manasseh. And let me read to you just how bad he is. So the background of these chapters is that Hezekiah is immediately followed by his son Manasseh, who is an awful historic figure, like horrendously awful. 2 Kings 21, listen to this. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hespbazbah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and he erected altars for Baal, and made an Asherah, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and serve them. So all the deities of the sky, like this god, this sun god, this star god, like worshipped all of them and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem will I put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. Come on, man. And he burned his son, like seriously, as an offering, and used fortune telling and omens, and dealt with mediums and necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. And who knows that how the leader goes, so goes the people who are following him. So as a king goes, so goes the nation. He's leading them into all kinds of abhorrent action here. And the carved image of Asherah that he had made is set in the house of the Lord, which the Lord said to David and Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I'll put my name forever. Like, I'm going to dwell here. And then Manasseh brings this rubbish into the temple. And I will not cause the feet of Israel to wander anymore out of the land that I gave to their fathers, if only they will be careful to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. But they did not listen, and Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done before, whom the Lord destroyed before the people of Israel. Moreover, Manasseh shed much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to the other, besides the sin that he made Judah to sin, so that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Like, bad, bad guy. So after him, his son Amon comes, and he's a rotter as well, and his servants conspired against him, and they got rid of him, and then they made Josiah, his son, the king. Josiah's like, if you're reading through Kings and Chronicles, Josiah's like this breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, phew, thank goodness. And he's a legend. But the renewal only lasts as long as the political situation's okay. So basically what happens then is that Josiah goes out to march against Egypt. And then let's have a look on this map. So Egypt goes out to assist the falling Assyria, because Babylon's on the rise, as Lockie said last week. Assyria is coming down, and so Egypt goes out to assist the failing Assyria. But Josiah has aligned himself with the emerging Babylonians because they don't like Assyria. It's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He attempts to intercept the Egyptian army but is killed in battle by Egypt. Judah is made a vassal. Pharaoh is Judah's new overlord. Josiah, the wonderful king, is dead, and now they're just a puppet king for Pharaoh. The death of Josiah, unfortunately, is the beginning of the end. Jehoahaz and Jehoiakim are the kings, but then the Babylon conquers Egypt. Babylon conquers Egypt and all their territories. This is 605 BC. So now Jehoiakim has to pledge allegiance to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. But after 3 years, he rebels and he gets carried off to Babylon. His son's put in as a puppet in his place. He too's taken away, and so his brother Zedekiah is put in. Zedekiah refuses to pay tribute, so it's at that time that Nebuchadnezzar pulls the trigger. He marches against Jerusalem. He lays siege to it for 1.5 to 2 years. Jerusalem falls and the city is burnt and levelled. Zedekiah witnessed the murder of his sons. He was blinded and marched into captivity to Babylon. Now, the people in the city were taken into exile, while the rural people, the peasants, the uneducated, they were left to continue there. The people had lost the temple, the place of God's presence, their land, what was their identity. They'd lost it all. And the sign of God's blessing upon them, that they were brought into that land, it's all been destroyed. The entire establishment of Jerusalem is destroyed. But the new Babylonian empire didn't last long after Nebuchadnezzar. Then, oceans rise, empires fall. Persia was beginning to rise, and Babylon was conquered by Cyrus in 539 BC. With Cyrus, we see the Great Persian Empire, which would last for 200 years until Alexander the Great. And Cyrus is a central figure in Isaiah 40 to 55, who features as the servant of Yahweh to restore Israel to the land. Cyrus, he considered himself patron to all the gods of the nations that he'd conquered, so he reinstated their religious practices of the nations that he was now over, including in Jerusalem, by allowing the temple to be rebuilt. Now, these passages are why that some suggest that there has to be a shift in authorship because it's just so vastly different. And we're going to have a look at this theological difference as well. But again, personally, I believe that Isaiah could have written that prophetically. So, one of the key concepts in these passages, there's so many key concepts, but one of them is the servant song. So we're just going to have a look at them now. The passages are going to come up on the screen. And we just want you to discuss and look at them and ask who do you think they refer to, and you're going to have an obvious answer. But just to let you know that at the time, obviously, people didn't see Jesus in these. They thought, and even now, people who don't believe in Jesus, they see that perhaps this is the people of Israel, perhaps this is the remnant, perhaps it's a promised Messiah figure still to come. But let's think about the characteristics of this servant and how do they point us to Christ, and how should we serve in light of these passages. So go ahead and read those now. Pause again and read Isaiah 52:13 to 53:12, noting your initial reactions to the text. The thing about these passages is that the sin has its consequence in the sufferer. The disease of sin, the breaking of the covenant of sin, all finds its consequence and healing in the sufferer. And so for us, this is just incredible. We now are included because our sin could not be dealt with, but it has been dealt with by the suffering servant. Now, we can get confused because all the things don't play out literally, but there's a lot of use of imagery and poetic literature here, and so we don't need it to be like a play-by-play. It's not historical literature, this section. It's not meant to be spelling out the various characteristics. But certainly, if we put this scripture together with Philippians, we can see so many similarities as per the table that's about to come up. And so we see that even the New Testament writers, they saw Jesus in these passages, as it's recorded in Acts chapter 8 with Philip and the eunuch. It says in chapter 8, verse 30 to 35, so Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet. Side note that God will show us where God is already at work and have us come alongside that. And asked, do you understand what you're reading? And he said, how can I unless someone guides me? And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Now the passage of the scripture that he was reading was this. Like, what are the chances that Philip gets this opportunity to speak into this scripture? Like a sheep where he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before its shearers is silent, so he opens not his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth. And the eunuch said to Philip, about whom, I ask you, does this prophet say this, about himself or someone else? The question that we're asking right now. Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with this scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. So we see that the early church related these passages in Isaiah to Jesus himself. But they're all carried off to exile. There's this promise and there's this comfort that's coming out in chapters 40 to 55. And now they're heading back. And this is referred to as the second Exodus, but it's not this mass coming out of slavery like it was from Egypt to the Promised Land. It's this trickling out from this slavery back to what they had, which has been absolutely decimated. And there's consequences of that as well. The commentator Webb estimates that it would have taken the returnees at least a 4-month journey through the harsh terrain, travelling between 800 and 1,500 kilometres. And in both Exodus experiences, both from Egypt to the Promised Land and now from Babylon back to Jerusalem, they experience hostility from the people in the lands that they travelled through on their way home. There's also this idea here of the battle of the gods. So if you want to pause and read Isaiah chapter 41, verse 21 to 24 to get the picture here. The question in this passage is, which God really has the power? And the argument revolves around prediction and understanding. It's that the nations who participate in and are agents of the exile and restoration, they're not simply just doing their own thing and sole agency, but they're agents of Yahweh and not other gods. This is not, like, the exile didn't mean that their God was victorious over Yahweh. No, Yahweh had sovereignty over the whole matter and was doing something deeper than they could have imagined. It wasn't about them getting the power. It was much more than that. It was about salvation, in effect, for the whole world. This is the book of Isaiah. It gets to talking about the salvation that's offered to all. Now, what was an issue, obviously, for the people of Judah as they return is the worship of idols. They'd come out of and been judged for worshipping idols, and then they go to a nation who worships other idols, and now they've got to go back to their own country in kind of remembering their covenant relationship with Yahweh and try not to do that again. And so Isaiah, in these passages, reminds them that God was not and cannot be made by human hands, but in fact he made human hands. So there's this picture in Isaiah. It's a clear progression about the future of Zion going from abandonment, loneliness and fear to fulfillment and joy. So pause and read Isaiah 49, 14 to 53 and have a look at that. So there's responses and counterclaims between Zion and Yahweh as he builds hope and life and expectation. Zion voices her doubts. Yahweh responds to woo and answer her doubts. And in this next passage, we're going to see reconciliation. Shame and barrenness are reversed. The relationship's now going to be characterized by a deep and tender love. So go ahead and pause and read Isaiah 54, 1 to 8 together and ask yourself the question, what reactions am I having to this text and how does it relate to us now? Another implication that we see throughout all this is the restoration of creation. And always, and especially through Romans, we see that the idea of salvation is not just for us and our souls, but it has far-reaching ramifications and impact not only on people around us, but on creation around us. And that actually God's not just restoring us, but he's restoring all of creation. He's not just renewing us, but he's renewing all of creation. So have a look at this table, and we see very clearly that the world is into self-promotion. Just a second, Lockie talking last week about Hezekiah, it just made me think of this moment. I was at the minister's moment. I was like, Brian, you're just trying to show that what you are in this room is not all you are. Like, just ouch, gross, hate it, but it's real, and there it is. So the world, back to this little table, is into self-promotion. That's not what God is into, and in these passages in Isaiah, that's not where he's up to. He's into self-sacrifice. The world is into taking. Under the covenant, we're into giving. The world is into power, and under the covenant, we're into weakness. That his power is made perfect in our weakness. And we see that through the suffering of the servant. That, in the world, we're talking about autonomous individuals here, but in covenant, we're part of a body. The Eastern way is more correct in this than the Western way. That the world is into physical beauty, but the covenant is into spiritual character. So that's all things to think about and discuss. Maybe leave that table up on the screen and discuss what that brings out of you. Maybe share confess your own story that you've got where you know you made it about you and it shouldn't have been. God bless you. Enjoy.